Hi, I'm Rich Fink from the Western Loudon Art and Studio Tour, and today it's my privilege to be interviewing Lori DeMark, who is a jeweler, designer, and printmaker. Lori, how are you today?
Rich, I'm doing great. Thanks for asking.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. Okay, well let's get a move on here. And can you tell me a little bit about your artistic journey?
I would be delighted to. My journey started at the Maryland Institute College of Art and Design, studying art education with a focus on ceramics, and I spent 2 years there. I wound up transferring my undergraduate studies to Penn State University and continued with art education in ceramics, but also had the opportunity to work in the printmaking studio, which I enjoyed tremendously. I wrapped my undergraduate experience up and went into the field to teach art for several years. And then a new chapter opened, and I moved to Tucson, Arizona to attend the University of Arizona and work on my master's in art education with a focus on printmaking. While in Tucson, I also had the exposure of the local arts community, specifically the Tucson Gem and Mineral Show, which is held each year in February, where they bring artists and artisans as well as vendors from literally all over the world. And having that exposure really influenced and kind of propelled me, as well as working in the community and being able to take metalsmithing classes. So the foundation of the printmaking and then metalsmithing merging together was a pursuit that I started to focus on with my own jewelry designs.
And how long have you been working as a professional artist?
We're going to stay for over 20 years.
Okay. All right. That's great. That's great. Okay. In that time, though, in those 2 decades, how has your style changed?
It's it's changed a lot. When I first started out as a jeweler, it was while I was living in Tucson, and I really tended to just focus on my sterling silver, manipulating wire forms, and then using beads that I would add to my work. Uh, I spent 7 years in Arizona and then moved to Loudoun County about 15 years ago. And since being in Loudoun County, I've changed my style quite a bit to work with sterling silver, copper, and brass, and kind of merging those metals together in different forms. Still working with wire. I use a cold hammering technique to manipulate my metal. And then I also draw from that printmaking experience. I have a printing press that I work with, and I use, the metals are so soft that I can sandwich a design or embossment between two pieces of steel and then press it right onto the metal, which leaves me with different results. The same thing with ceramics. I'm very fortunate to share a studio with my husband, Jeff DeMark, who is a potter. And so my clay work that I use, the same clay bodies that he uses with his work, usually high fire porcelain or high fire stoneware. And again, I use that printmaking technique and emboss it onto it. So kind of merging those, the jewelry plus the printmaking together to create what I consider to be wearable art.
That's great. That's really cool. So going from the Southwest and here to Virginia, and seeing things that are different, the different types of art to do things. What of your of the time that you've spent in both areas, what inspires you now for your jewelry and your printmaking?
I'm traditionally inspired by nature. I love looking and seeing what I can find in my yard. I have a pretty extensive garden, and so I try to pull from different plants and things that I find, especially with the clay pieces, and emboss them, and they actually even fire them right into the clay body while it's being bisque fired. With my metals, I just love seeing kind of just what the metal does when you cold hammer it and when you solder it, leaving it a little bit more rustic, I would say, than super polished and finished. So just letting kind of the material lead me instead of me manipulating the material.
Okay. Well, since we're talking about these beautiful things, why don't we switch over and take a look at three of them? Does that sound good to you?
Sounds perfect.
Okay, cool. Okay, and here we are. So I'm going to be a little traditional here and go from left to right. Okay, so you have a collection here
Hmm.
of, and these look to me to be pendants, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So is this like a collection that you have of various square items, and what type of materials did you use to make these beautiful things?
Well, there's a variety. So some are stoneware, some are different types of high-fired clay bodies that, again, my husband uses in the studio. And then the result is the glazing that's done on top of them that kind of changes each one, whether it's porcelain or whether it's high-fire stoneware material. Shaping wise, I tend to work in a kind of square rectangular format, but I also have circular pieces where I put two pieces of clay together and they're kind of fused as well. I love seeing what the clay does and how it interacts. I think the printmaking comes out on these pieces because you can see the impressions and the embossments that were made by different found objects that I use. Sometimes I create my own stamps out of plaster and I push those in as well. But how the glaze kind of separates and pulls on those designs to kind of create more depth in the overall pendant.
Okay. And you can definitely see some of the, like to me anyway, as we go far left and south, all the way south, this image here, which is to me like a sun image,
Mm-hmm.
uh, would definitely speak to the influence from the Southwest.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the bottom ones, the impressions that you see were just different stamps that I made using plaster by the circular one or kind of more the square one, and then rolling that stamp across a very small and flat slab of clay to manipulate it.
Okay. Can you give me an idea of, because I am definitely not a potter or anything, but they're all unique in a way. And I would just like to have give me an idea going down the road
Sure.
how these were created.
Absolutely. Well, you know what? Found objects are wonderful with clay, and clay has such a plastic material that whatever you push in, you can get amazing results. So one of the middle ones to the left, kind of above the one that's the sun, actually I used the side of a coin and rolled a coin in, just back and forth several times. The ones to the right of that, I think has different plant fibers that were kind of pushed into it as well. So it's a whole variety of kind of stamp forms to things that I'm just finding as an object. I'm like, oh, let's see what that says. And just to kind of play around and see the embossment that it makes and then how the glaze reacts to that embossment.
And that's very cool because obviously each one is unique. Yes?
Absolutely. There's no two that are exactly alike.
That's correct. All right, let's move to the big middle one with the earrings.
Mm-hmm.
What can you tell me about this and about your inspiration on this?
Sure, absolutely. So that the base is sterling silver, kind of like the rectangular background with a brass formed coil that's over top of it that was cold hammered separately. Once I had both kind of shapes created, let me actually go back. This sterling silver piece that's behind is a piece of sheet metal that I buy. And then what I do is I cut it. I have a sanding belt that I kind of take the material down and shape it. That was also then, I think, was cold hammered as well. And then separately, I went over top with the brass piece and formed that. So that would have been an original wire shape, kind of a round coil that was shaped first, then cold hammered. And once I had the forms that I really liked, those two pieces were then soldered together. And after they're soldered, they go into like a homemade pickle that I have, which is just vinegar and salt, which kind of eats all the fire scale away from the carbon that's on the metals, and then it is polished. And I sometimes go back and use like a sandpaper kind of material again to kind of give it a little bit of a texture. If I need to be going back in, I cold hammer it as well. And then at that point, when the earring body is pretty much completed, I'm going to be adding a finding to it, which would be the French ear wire.
Oh, okay. How big is this earring? I mean, I know it's not this big, but
Sure.
I just.
It's not as big as the ones I'm wearing right now. It's probably about half the size. So I'm going to say the body is probably about no more than 1.5 to 2 inches. And then the ear wire adds probably another 1/2 inch. So somewhere in the 2 to 2.5 inch range.
Okay. It's really beautiful. It's really unique, I think, is even a better word for it. And so let's move over to the last image, which is actually several images.
Mm-hmm.
And so this, I would say, is another collection of your designs. Is that accurate?
That's correct. Yes, moving just to sterling silver with the pendants with some brass on these that are added. You probably see, I really love working with circles and with the clay pieces, kind of more in a, not all of them are rectangular or square pieces, but circle is something that's always coming up in my designs, especially spirals. I love finding them in nature and then trying to replicate them in my designs. So all these pieces start with a wire. Most of the wires that you're seeing in these images range from like a 12 to 14 gauge, although sometimes they're thinner. I'm going to form my circular form around a circular shape that I find, and it could be a random of different types of shapes. It could be a ring mandrel that I'm using. It could be a small container that I bend the wire around until I like the desired shape. It's cut and it's soldered first to attach it, and then after it's soldered, then I cold hammer it the same way that I would do with like the middle pair of earrings as well, and forming it until I find my desired shape. I'd like to mention that the two pendants that have the brass on them both have a texture that was put through the printing press before being soldered onto the circular form.
Okay. What is it about the circle that draws you to it?
I think I like the conciseness of it. So it encapsulates something. So it's almost like a small frame. So a lot of these have something within the circle, so they kind of interact with it. So I think I like what they actually, I'm wearing a piece that's similar to what's on the screen right now. I like the way I think they rest when somebody wears them. If it's up on your neck or if it's down on your blouse, I think it has a nice kind of final presentation to it.
And what I really like is the circles are really precise. I mean, they are, they're not a little lopsided or anything like that. It's really a great part of the design.
Wonderful, thank you.
So why don't we go back to where the two of us are just chatting away and take it from there.
Sounds great.
And here we are. Here we are. So, Lori, I really wish that I put in some of your printmaking actually here to see some of that, because that's one of your major skills. But all of these things really spoke to me, so that's why they're here. So it is. And what I'd like to do now is, there are so many people out there that would love to see more of your inventory, and the best way to do that, particularly at this time, is your connections to social media and your URL to your website, and this way they can not only see it, but hopefully, and I certainly think so, buy more of it.
That'd be great. On Facebook with DeMark Wear. And wear as in that you wear something, W-E-A-R. And I have that attached to my Instagram account as well, where I tend to post things that I'm working on, as well as maybe some studio shots of what things look like. I'm in the process of creating my Etsy account, which is ready to go live any day. And so I'm excited to share that with the inventory that I have actually behind me right now, which are recently created pieces. So I look forward to getting those out into the community to see and appreciate, and also on social media. So if anybody would be interested in adorning themselves, that they can reach out to me.
Oh, terrific, terrific. I do have a question for you. Is there anything that that you would like to say more about your art that we haven't brought up to this point?
I'm still an art teacher, and actually my schedule has really opened up. I teach in the, yes, I just finished my 23rd year of teaching art. I have always been an art teacher, and I have taught from the preschool level at Montessori to elementary, middle school, high school. And while in Arizona, I also taught at the University of Arizona, teaching pre-service art educators. Currently, my home is at Harmony Middle School in Hamilton, Virginia, where I work with 6th, 7th, or 8th grade students.
Okay. So how many people in all that time have you impressed to become artists?
You know, it's probably thousands, honestly, over that amount of time, and with the population that an art teacher sees, which is kind of exciting. And I always enjoy my students as they get older and they come through my studio and they come to visit. It's always wonderful to see them again and to hear where their journey has taken them as well, especially if it's been in art.
Especially, yes. Okay, well, Lori, it's been really fun chatting with you today, and I have a couple of things I would like you to make sure that you do. One is to stay safe.
Thank you.
Another is to stay healthy, and the other one is just to have a fabulous day.
I will, and I hope you do too. And I send those same regards back to you. And I have really enjoyed our conversation today. It was something that was very much needed. So thank you.
You're welcome.